Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode. The episode called is Crucifixion, Fact or Fiction, and this is the fourth episode, if I'm not wrong, of Michael and I on a Friday night. So Shaherald Friday nights with Mike. So thank you all for tuning in. For those who are here, I can see like there's about 11 viewers at the moment right now. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope tonight's session would be an interesting one for you. But mainly, before we begin, I'd just like to share with you, the whole purpose of why we're doing this video, this live stream again, is to learn about other faiths so that we can learn to, respect each other, live among each other harmoniously, especially in Singapore, given that we are a multi-religious society. It's very important also why we share this because coming from my past faith, I'm a Catholic. Michael, he's also a Catholic before he reverted to Islam. We get a lot of questions, especially for myself, about why you chose Islam, why do you not see Christianity as the faith that you wanted to follow? It was your birth religion. So I get a lot of questions, and one of the reasons why it's because of the research we've done, and that's why tonight's sharing would be covering the reasons why I felt there were some things that I could not reconcile with. And so Michael here is firstly also quite a specialist in this area. He's been the Cal's Carmelite monk for 8.5 years, and that was in I don't know, I can't remember the year, but it's quite a while back, right? Yeah, I think 9 years ago before you became Muslim. I think it's 9 years already, right, Michael? You're Muslim
Yeah,
for 9 years.
yeah,
Yeah, and so he spent 8.5 years to really dive deep into the Bible. He can understand Koine Greek, Latin, and so for someone who actually looks at the Bible in detail, he would be the best person to share with us tonight about what he finds and research on, as you will seek an expert if you look for a doctor, right? If you're sick. So here's me, on his learning journey, finding out more about why Michael also have such similar views as I do. But before we go on to that, I just want to emphasize a bit on who is Jesus to the Muslims, okay, so that you can understand where is exactly the difference between Muslims and Christianity. So Muslims, we also love Jesus. We revere him as one of the mightiest messengers of God. We believe in his miraculous birth. He's also the Messiah. We call him the Messiah. The translated in translation for Greek is Christos, and that he gave life to the dead. Okay, by the will of God, and even brought the sick back to healing, cure the lepers and the blind, all by God's permission. So from that part, everything is quite similar to Christianity, but what is the real difference is the divinity of Jesus, and more so, where we are looking into the crucifixion tonight, which is where one of the core difference is between Islam and Christianity. So without much further ado, I'm bringing Michael up to the forefront. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Michael, welcome.
Well, yes, thank you for having me again.
Yes.
And,
Did I say everything right so far? Yeah.
oh, you're good.
Oh, thank you.
Your memory is sharp.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I like to start again. I don't say anything to purposely offend anybody. There's no hate or malice in my heart towards Christians, Jews, or anybody like that. As I said, the whole process of these videos from, one till now and to be continued is to just go through my experience and relay and teach where I found for myself, especially today with the crucifixion fact or fiction. I'm sure you remember, brother, and anybody watching, that this one for me was definitely, I said this before, it was the hardest one for me to really come to grips with, even though it appears to be the most absurd of all the teachings of Christianity in the Bible, or what the church says, whether it's Jesus' divinity or the Trinity or Jesus divine son of God. Even though the crucifixion, being he's God and man, and his sacrifice for the sins of the world, and but he's God's son, but he's so innocent, never did anything wrong. But I said it before and I say it again. As I said, I believe it was the end of the first video or the beginning of the second episode. It was either the end of the first or beginning of second. But this one for me was definitely my hardest one to come to peace with. Maybe everybody's different. Again, this is just my experience. But for me, it was a tough thing to overcome. But Allah guided me, alhamdulillah, allowed me to find solutions and answers that made sense for me. So to begin with, I guess, of course, where I'd like to start, again, this is how I kind of looked at it from my experience with when I was really looking at everything again back when I was, not listening to the monks or the priests anymore. And I wasn't talking to the imam anymore at this point. It was just me. And it was me and just me. And so, again, when I started to dive into it, the first place that I always go to is the Old Testament. I've used this word before, typology, typological readings of the Bible, Old Testament prophecies, New Testament fulfillments. It's very Catholic, not just Catholic, it's a Christian way of reading the Bible, but I think the Catholics tend to use it a little bit more. But as I said before, there's typology prophecy it could be this type, the way they understand it, as I said in episodes before. Real quick, just to bring it, people who might have forgot or, they're new to this episode for the first time. The typological studies of the Bible are basically Old Testament prophecies. And again, that could be people, places, things, events that are fulfilled in the person of Jesus. So this is like the main way that the Christians read their Bibles, from the Old Testament. So to begin with, when I went into my own self-study of the crucifixion, whether it, for me, was something that was true or not, I began in the Old Testament. And now today I only have 4 Old Testament, the 4 more major ones the Christians use. But there's many, many more. Well, I wouldn't say many, many more on the crucifixion, but there are more. But for the sake of time, I didn't want to, wind up making this 2 hours on the Old Testament stuff. So the first one that I would definitely say was where I started was Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. It's the story of Abraham. And of course, we believe it was Ishmael that was, took the wood of the cross up to the not the cross, the wood to be sacrificed. But in the Bible, for those who might not know, it's Isaac, the son, Isaac, was the one to carry the wood. So when I say Isaac, it's the same story pretty much. It's just a different son. But in Genesis chapter 22, you have the story of Abraham and Isaac. Now, the story really begins with God asking Abraham, the angel asking Abraham to go and to offer his son, Isaac, to take him up the mount on top of the hill and to sacrifice his son. And from the beginning of the story in Genesis, again, chapter 22, you read that Abraham was nothing but obedient. And I was going to read the whole Bible, verse 1 to 22, but it's a little bit lengthy, so I didn't want to really dive too deep into it. So anybody who really wants to go look at that, again, it's Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. But I'm just going to touch on certain points and verses that are more of what I was looking at. I was looking at the whole thing, but just for the sake of time. So in verse number 12, the angel said, "Do not lay your hands on the boy." So now at this point, again, Abraham is being obedient to God, to the angel, who's the representative of God, saying, "Take your son, take him to the top, and slaughter him." And Of course, and again, Isaac is carrying the wood, and Isaac gets up to the top, and Abraham, is up at the top, and then all of a sudden the angel appears and says, "Do not lay your hands on the boy." And also, sorry to begin with, actually, sorry, this whole story, before I go into all the reading stuff, the whole point of the story, the reason the Christians look at this in their Bibles as pointing to, Jesus and his crucifixion, is because Abraham is the father of Isaac in the Bible. Okay. And the way the Christians read this, before I get into the details, so you understand it a little bit more, I think it's better to start this way. The way that the Christians read this, Abraham was like the father of Isaac. Well, in the New Testament, who was the father? Jesus. The father. When, the Christians look at Abraham representing father, so that's going to take his son to the top of the mount and, slaughter him. Well, the Christians, they look at Abraham as that father, and in the New Testament, they say that, when Jesus was supposed to be, when he was, according to them, crucified and risen from the dead, it was the Father's in obedience, as Paul says, in obedience to the Father. So the Father was commanding his son, just as Abraham was commanding Isaac, by order of God through the angel, to go and sacrifice. And the Christians look at Jesus as the new Isaac, because he's the one, even in the Old Testament story, he's the one who's actually carrying the wood. Abraham doesn't carry the wood. Isaac carries the wood up to the top of the mountain, and then they're there. And then, of course, Jesus being the new Isaac. So remember that, as we go through this a little bit. And then in verse 12, the angel says, "Do not lay your hand on the boy." So at this point, we have the angel saying to Abraham, don't slaughter him. Then in verse 13, Abraham found a ram in the thicket and offered the ram in place of his son. So here when the Christians say that Jesus is the new Isaac, right? The one thing that I think they, I never, back then I didn't think of it that way, but when I was doing my own little self-study, again, I came to discover this. In this whole story, what happens was Isaac slaughtered? No. What happened? He was saved. So if Jesus is the new Isaac, he must have been saved, because this is one of the bigger stories that they try to, put together with the crucifixion of Jesus in obedience to the Father, this story. But again, like I said, if Jesus is the new Isaac, which is, what the Christians claim according to this story, who, was willing to, because even in the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, you have Isaac being obedient. Abraham tells him, carry the wood, carry it. And then when he gets up there, he's also obedient. So the whole time you have obedient Isaac, just as the whole time you have obedient Jesus in the New Testament. So they try to put it together. But my point is there's no slaughtering or killing. What happens? God tells the angel to say what? Do not lay your hands on him. So we find God, saving Isaac in this situation. He wasn't sacrificed. He wasn't killed. He wasn't burned on the stake. There was no crucifixion back then, but he wasn't burnt. Normally back then, when they did these kind of offerings, it'd be like burnt offerings, and so there nothing but saved. So if the Christians are going to say, this is the way that I started to understand this, if the Christians are going to say Jesus is the new Isaac who went up the mountain with Abraham to be sacrificed, then you have to believe at some point in the life of Jesus, in the real life of Jesus, as we believe as Muslims, they neither killed him nor crucified him, as Surah Nisa, 157. Then it makes more sense Islamically to believe if Isaac was saved and Jesus is the new Isaac by the definition the Christians use for typology. Therefore, Jesus, as the new Isaac, must also be saved and spared. Isaac wasn't sacrificed. Why would Jesus be why would Isaac be saved and Jesus sacrificed? Doesn't make sense if he's the new Isaac. Isaac was saved, therefore Jesus was saved, as we believe as Muslims. So that definitely goes into and of course, as we know in this story, Jesus, not Jesus, Abraham was blessed for this. This is the part where, God says, for your obedience, I'll bless you. And, excuse me, by your obedience, I'll bless you. And he was given this, great, beautiful gift of descendants that were more multiple than the stars of the heaven, And so, again, Jesus, the new Isaac, would be a Jesus that's saved and spared from any suffering or death. Not one hair on Isaac's head was touched, not one little drop of blood was spared. So when I started to look at it like this, instead of just always trusting the way that I always read it and really I was looking at it both ways for me. I really came to feel like, it does make more sense. If Jesus is the new Isaac, Isaac was saved, therefore Jesus must have been saved. The next story is the story of Jonah.
Oh wait, sorry. Before you go to Jonah, let me just give a quick summary of this, and also to help bridge the understanding. So in the Quran, we believe that it wasn't Isaac who was being brought up to be sacrificed by Abraham, but it was Ishmael. So if you guys don't know the Quran, Abraham is called Ibrahim, and Isaac is Ishaq, and Ishmael is Ismail. So okay, so that's where the difference is, and it's quite apt that you shared this first point because it's also in the month of Eid. So it's the reason why we celebrate Eid is also to remember this significant moment where Abraham brought his son up for sacrifice, but he wasn't sacrificed here. So both the Quran and the Bible agrees that none of his children was sacrificed. He brought his child up because according to God, he was obeying God, and God stopped that from happening. So now the thing, what Michael is trying to draw, this this what do you call that? This conclusion, or this link between Jesus's sacrifice on the cross and Isaac, which he says that most Christians actually believe, right? There's a correlation between these two events. One, where Abraham is sacrificing his son, and therefore Jesus was like being commanded by God to be sacrificed. So the similarity in their essence is about sacrifice, which they're trying to draw um, the correlation between these two events. But the thing that Michael is saying is they did not look into the sacrifice, being that it didn't happen for Isaac in the Bible at all. So Isaac was not killed at all. He did not die and or raised from the dead. Isaac was basically being stopped from death. From his father. Whereas Jesus, in the biblical theology, would have died on the cross and rose up 3 days later. Correct. So that's the disparity, the change, the difference. Did I do that correct, brother?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now next point.
The second story would be the story of Jonah.
Okay.
Which is, of course, the only one. This is actually the only story that Jesus even mentions in the New Testament. If you believe that he actually talked about himself dying and stuff, or rising from the dead, this is the only story in the whole entire New Testament, the story of Jonah. So, of course, the Christians, again, typologically, they're looking at Jesus, as the new Jonah. So in the story of Jonah, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, you have this story, of course, and it's pretty much the same story as the Quranic story. They're very, very similar stories. There's a little bit of differences in what Jonah says, but it's pretty much the same thing. But like I said, in Jonah chapter 2, you find the story of Jonah, and the whole story about Jonah. Of course, Jonah's up on top of, in the Bible, of course. I'm going back to the story of Jonah in the Bible, not the Quranic version. So what happens in the story of Jonah is he happens to be standing up. There's a big storm that comes, and Jonah is standing up on the. They're trying to get rid of things. Him and his people in this boat. There's a very massive storm, and as the storm keeps raving and raving, they're throwing stuff out and throwing stuff out, and nothing's working, and nothing's getting them out. So then they all drew straw pieces in the Bible, story of Jonah, and the book of Jonah. Sorry, book of Jonah. And then they all have like, little straw pieces, and whoever wound up with the shortest of the straws would have to be thrown out. So Jonah just happens to have these draws the shortest one. So of course he gets thrown into the water, and as he's sinking, he's swallowed by a whale. Now, one thing with this story of Jonah is it goes into Jonah is in the whale, but the question is, when he's in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, which is how many days and nights in the book of Jonah? Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. So again, the question would be: was Jonah at that point in the belly of the whale, in the biblical description? Was Jonah alive or was he dead?
Alive.
He was alive.
Alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have this story again. When I'm trying to this is again my experience. When I'm really looking at this story about Jonah and the belly of the whale, Jonah doesn't die. Jonah's not dead. He's alive. And the whole thing throughout, he's alive. It even excuse me. So this whole again, just like the story of Isaac and Abraham, we see here in this story of Jonah. Jonah is in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, and he's alive. No, well, okay, I'm not going to say no, but about 90 to 95% of Christian scholars, Catholic scholars, biblical scholars, they all agree he was alive. So I don't understand how they go from Jonah is in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, alive. God spared his life. God saved him. And then how you connect that to the death of Jesus, if they, as the Christians believe, that he died. If Jesus is the new Jonah, and Jonah was spared, Jonah was alive, and Jonah prayed to God in the belly of the whale, and God spared him, saved him, and rescued him, well, that would mean in the New Testament, in the life of Jesus would also have to be saved and rescued and spared if he's the new Jonah. Old Jonah, I mean, of course, it's a miracle he was alive. It's something only Allah can do, To be in the belly of a whale for 3 days and 3 nights seems pretty scary,
Claustrophobic. I would definitely not be able to live long in the belly of the whale.
I think I'm gonna have to try that one sometime soon.
Yeah.
Go try to see if I can survive. So it's definitely a miracle that he was alive. That's number one. And it's like I said, and he's spared, he's saved, and he is preserved. And so therefore, if Jesus, as the Christians believe, again, this is one of the bigger things they look at as a sign, as one of the bigger Old Testament typological readings. And they say Jesus is the old Jonah, and Jesus is now the new. Jonah is this kind of figure that portrays the future Jesus on the cross and resurrection. Again, doesn't make sense. What we believe as Muslims, this is what I found out. What we believe as Muslims, that God saved his prophet Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, makes more sense in that context. You want to summarize that one, or you want me to move on?
Yeah. Let me summarize this. Okay. So where Michael is drawing this connection is, if you can look at, if you have the King James Bible, or maybe even any Bible, if you look at Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, it says that, for Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And that is the verse where it tries to draw a similarity to how Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale. So if you're wondering who Jonah is in the Quran, it's actually Yunus. Yunus is Jonah, in the Quran. Okay, so we have the same story. How Yunus was also swallowed by the whale 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. But what is the question that Michael is confused with, or basically he has a question about this is Jonah was alive the whole time in the belly of the whale, but Jesus was not. Apparently, he's dead for 3 days and 3 nights. But again, the day is not exactly three. If I'm also not, if I'm correct, I mean,
You
if
are
I'm not
correct.
wrong, because for the Jews, they start counting the day after Maghrib. In Islam is basically in the evening. That's the start of the day, which is not like how you look at the day in today's time, which is the sun when it starts rising. That's the start of the day. But for Jews and for Muslims, we look at the start of the day in the evening. So if Jesus was in the heart of the earth, remember he was actually there for 2 days, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah,
right?
it would have been around 2.5 days.
2.5 days if you count
Yeah,
the day
yeah.
here.
Not the 3 days and 3 nights. Yes, good
So
point.
that numerical number was also not accurate in comparison to the story of Jonah. So one is the days that he spent in the tomb would be less than three, and also that he was dead for 3 days, but Jonah was alive. So that was one of the things that Michael couldn't reconcile with. Yep. Did I get it right so far? Okay.
You
Yeah.
got it.
Next.
The next point is Psalm 22, which is the story of the suffering servant. This Psalm 22 is where the Christians. It's probably the one psalm that. Well, I mean, there are some other ones, but it's pretty descriptive. It kind of goes through the. Well, they call it the Psalm of the Suffering Servant. During Lent, it's during Lent, which is the season, before Easter and Good Friday. They tend to have this in their services daily during Holy Week. It's daily on Good Friday. It's again said. So there's a reason, because they really believe this points to the death of Jesus, to the suffering and death. And this, if you read this psalm again, Psalm 22, if anybody wants to actually look that up, I was going to read it because it's better if I got really descriptive with it, but it actually goes, it's a lot of verses. You might spend 10 minutes reading it. It's a really long psalm. So it kind of starts out with this suffering servant image. It says, it starts to talk about, and they look at it as Jesus, in his crucifixion. And the song kind of goes through some graphic images. It goes through, his feet will be pierced, and all these kind of detailed descriptions of his suffering, of the crucifixion. Again, if you read it, you'll see the depiction of the suffering servant and why they would believe possibly that could be an image of the suffering servant of Jesus. But the part that they don't, um, it's funny because when I started to really think about this, excuse me, when I start to really think about this Psalm of the Suffering Servant, you know, I never, I mean, like I've read the whole thing, yes, but when you hear priests, or at least the priest that I saw preaching on this psalm, like for example, where I was in the monastery on Good Friday, the whole sermon was about this psalm, the suffering servant, Psalm 22, and it was the passion narratives, which were, of course, the crucifixion of Jesus, from excuse me, from the night, a couple nights before, when he was betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, and leading up to the crucifixion. That's like the passion narrative. So whenever the priest, he would talk about this stuff, or some of the monks, they always focused on this imagery of suffering, death, pain. And because in this, like I said, it's very graphic. It's very, this, whoever this suffering servant is, it's pretty graphic. And it goes into a lot of details about the pain and the sufferings of this servant. But when I really started to look into this for myself on my own time, and just kind of reflecting upon what I already knew from Psalm 22 and what I was reading now at that point, at verse 19 through 23, it starts to talk about this. Well, I'll quote verse 23. The suffering servant kept crying out to God to save him. And then in verse 24, then, quote, this is the suffering servant now. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of his afflicted one. God is the he. For God has not despised nor scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He, God, has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help and his plea, and has answered it. So in verse 24, now again, this is at the very, towards the very, very end of the psalm, and it's a long psalm. You have the suffering servant crying out for help and asking God to save him. It literally says, and he cried out for help and to be saved. And then it says, and God, nobody disagrees. Catholics, theologians, Jewish, the people who study the Psalms in the Old Testament, the Jewish scholar people, none of them, no one says that he who was going to save him in Psalm 22 was anybody but God. Everybody's in agreement that the he is God. So again, we have the suffering servant. He's crying out for help, and God hears his plea because of his afflictions and his suffering, and saves him from this suffering and his plea, and he's just relieved of his affliction. Again, you can read the whole thing, Psalm 22, the whole thing from beginning to end. And so we find here this image of some, maybe Jesus having some suffering, according to them. But what happens? Again, just like Jonah, just like Isaac, this suffering servant of Psalm 22, which is, pretty big deal for the Christians, Psalm 22, and it points to the crucifixion. We find here what happens. The suffering servant is saved at the end. Verse 24, God literally says, I will save you. As he's crying out for this help. And it says, your prayer has been heard. So if Jesus is this suffering servant, and they actually read this whole verse, Psalm 22 from beginning to end, it only makes sense to read it in light of the Quran and Surah Nisa, ayah 157, where it says, they're neither crucified nor, excuse me, sorry, was neither crucified nor killed. Okay. He was neither crucified nor killed. And so when we see this psalm, we see a Jesus who was saved just as Isaac was saved. We see a Jesus saved just as Jonah was saved. We see in Psalm 22, Jesus calling, or if that is supposed to be the image of Jesus, according to Christians, we see a Jesus who was saved while calling out in the midst of some suffering. And so therefore, Jesus definitely has to be the one who saved here, as we believe.
Yep.
Want to summarize?
So, no, I think you did quite a good explanation there. I mean, like, quite clear. Jesus basically was the suffering servant, if you were to look at it that way, and God saved him. So that is proven in Psalms 22, where God saved him from the affliction. Yeah.
Yep.
So in contrast to the actual events, technically Jesus would have been saved before he was put to the cross.
So
Yep.
that's going to be it for the Old Testament prophecies. Sorry. That's going to be it for the Old Testament prophecies. To summarize it real quick, Isaac was saved, spared, not one little shed of blood. And Isaac, of course, as I said, he was saved by God from that suffering and affliction, even though
Mm.
Abraham and Isaac were obedient, but Isaac was saved, the new Jesus, if that's who Jesus is supposed to be, the new Isaac, he also must be saved. And same thing with Jonah, the story of Jonah. If Jesus is the Jonah from the Old Testament, the 3 days and the 3 nights, and again, Jonah was alive in the belly of the whale. God did not let his prophet Jonah die in the book of Jonah. Therefore, if Jesus is the new Jonah, he would have to be alive. Not killed, then resurrected and alive, but alive. Then in Psalm 22, you see that, as I said, you have the depiction of the suffering servant. But what happens in verse 24? God, as the suffering servant is calling out for help from God, it says that he who is God heard his prayer, and his affliction was relieved. And you see this image of the suffering servant being saved. So
So
if the suffering servant was saved, that means Jesus has to be saved.
yeah. So that is where it is similar in the Quran, in the sense that we believe he was saved and not put it across. Right? That's the same part.
The next part that I want to go into is the agony, the New Testament, the agony in the garden, where Jesus fell on his face, and Garden of Gethsemane, the agony in the garden. It's found in all four gospel accounts. They all have differing things, but it's all there. But basically, you have he just finished the Last Supper in the upper room with his disciples. His 12 apostles. And then they went out into the garden, and out of the 12, 9 of them stayed in one spot. They were all there together, the 12 and Jesus. And then he took Peter, James, and John, from what the Gospels say, about a stone throw away, as far as you could throw a stone. And then there he left them, and he went a little bit further ahead from them. And it says that he fell down on his face, and he prayed, Father, take this cup of suffering away from me. Not my will, but yours be done. And he prayed 3 times in this, and as we pray in sujood, in prostration. And it says that at that time, as he's doing this, he's also sweating blood. No, there's no mention of tears. He's just sweating blood. But he's suffering, and he's crying out to God to save him from this suffering. Father, take this cup of suffering away from me. Not my will, but yours be done. And again, he says it 3 times in a row. Now, the reason that I put the agony in the garden right after this depiction of Garden of Gethsemane, these words of Jesus right after the suffering servant, is because I'm not going to say it's 100% in agreement, but it definitely seems like if there's any spot or any part in the New Testament narrative of the Passion Gospels of Jesus, again, from the upper room, going through Gethsemane and all the way up until his crucifixion, if there's any part where we find Jesus crying out for help as this suffering servant who's going to be saved according to verse 24 of Psalm 22, saved from his affliction, it's here. Now, am I saying Allah, at the end of the day, Allah knows best how or when this happened? To get into all the nitty-gritty details is not really, when it comes to how, when, where, what part, was he in the Garden of Gethsemane? Was he in the upper room? Was he in Pontius Pilate's temporium? Was he in prison in the basement where the Jews kept him for a night before they took him to Pontius Pilate? Allah knows best this. It's not something that I try to, or anybody should try to go into too much crazy kind of nitty-gritty details about, because at the end of the day, no matter how far we take that, Allah, alone, the one who actually saved him from death and spared him, is the one who knows best when these details happen. But for me, this is just me. That's why and again, it's just my own experience. When I looked at Psalm 22, and especially the suffering servant, because again, you see in the agony in the garden, when Jesus is on the ground, he has blood dripping from his head. Apparently he's suffering, right? He knows something's going to happen. And he knows the fact that he's got sweat coming down, drops of blood, not even sweat at this point. It's nothing but little drops of blood. And even, little drops of blood coming down. So he's in agony. That's why they call it the whole depiction in these 4 gospels. is what they call the agony in the garden, because Jesus was agonizing. Was he on a cross at this point? No. In the Bible, no. But he's beginning his agony. So in the beginning of his agony, this is the beginning of his agony. This is the very first thing that happens when he falls down and he's prostrate and he's praying to God. And again, remember, the Psalm 22, you have the suffering servant. So here, you still, even though Jesus isn't on the cross, he hasn't been crucified, he hasn't, in the Bible, he hasn't been, had a crown of thorns on his head. Even though he hasn't been flogged with the Roman, the Roman guards and, being whipped and beat and put, gigantic gashes all over his body, there's still an image of suffering, because that's why they call this the agony. He's agonizing and he's calling out to God. So he's sweating blood. There's little, the fact that there's blood, there's suffering going on at this point, and he's in pain, and he knows something's going to happen, and he calls out to God. So just as Psalm 22 starts with the agony, this agonizing, suffering servant, so we see Jesus in this depiction of the agony of the gardens. We see him as a suffering servant. The fact that according to the beginning of this, as I said, he has drops of blood, and he's crying out. It says crying out. The fact that he's crying out also shows there's some kind of fear. There's some kind of fear. There's some kind of anxiety. He's suffering even at this point. So Psalm 22 starts, the suffering servant, agony in the garden starts. We have the suffering servant. Then in verse 24, Psalm 22, verse 24, and he cried for help. The suffering servant cried for help, and then we see Jesus as the real suffering servant, who, unlike what the Christians might have depicted or believed about his crucifixion, his death, all the suffering that he went through along the way of his passion, death, and resurrection. But we see, just as in verse 24 of the suffering servant, Psalm 22, we see Jesus crying out. And if Jesus is supposed to be this new, if Jesus is supposed to be this new suffering servant, who, yes, has agony at the beginning, and then winds up being rescued because of his prayer and his suffering, and because of what he's being afflicted with, so too we see Jesus being saved, as we believe, as Allah reveals to us about, it was made to appear that way. And so, again, for me, when I really looked into the crucifixion, this is one of the things that I found for me. Again, this is just something from my experience. But when I really when I was correlating Psalm 22 with the agony in the garden and the beginning of the passion, and he's suffering, and then this might be the point where he's saved and Allah raised him up. But again, at the end of the day, I'm not, I leave that to Allah. But I'm just pointing out the fact that if Jesus is the suffering servant, he would have been saved. I mean, he would have, according to Psalm 22, he would have definitely went through some degree of suffering, and then his cry for help would have been there. And we have all three. We have these two working together perfectly, and it makes sense in light of the Quran and Psalm 22.
So you're here drawing a link from the Quran as well as Psalm 22 and the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was praying to God and asking for this cup to be taken away from him. And so it matches perfectly the events here where he prayed so hard to be saved and he was saved. Yeah. So, I mean, it's quite ironic also, right? I mean, that Jesus was, if Christians believe it's a God, but God was praying to a God, it would be a bit odd in that sense. But Jesus was praying to God and he was a man. So, in essence, that would not mean that he's divine from there. That's why he needed saving at that point of time. Yep.
Next point is Jesus gives the sign of Jonah in Matthew chapter 10, verse 4. Jesus says, he's speaking to the Jews, they're asking him for a sign. And Jesus says, no sign do I give to this evil and adulterous generation except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So even here we have Jesus himself, again, doing typology, right? He's doing some typological study of his own, future of the from Jonah until now. But again, we have Jesus here doing what? He's making the same kind of statement that I said about what they already believe, the Christians, when they look for these types from the Old Testament pointing to the New Testament. And Jesus says, Jesus here, we've already explained, that Jonah was alive, Jonah was spared, Jonah didn't have a one little cut or anything possible to show death or even coming close to death. He was alive and he was spared. So when I really started to look at this more deeply, I started to, when I was going through looking at what, putting the priest stuff aside, putting the email aside, and really looking at what is Jesus trying to tell me about the sign of Jonah, if he says it. And I had to conclude without after a while of really praying and really reasoning and going through it, I had to conclude that what Jesus is telling me is that he was spared and he was saved and alive, just as as Jonah was. Jesus is basically giving us, he's basically telling us as Muslims, as people, no matter what we are, what we believe, that I am the new Jonah. Jonah was alive. I'm alive. Jonah was spared. I was spared. But the Christians or anybody else, they read it a different way. And so we see that Jesus calling himself the new Jonah is saying, I am going to be spared, because he's basically making it clear about the excuse me, sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, why is this so important, right? For us discussing this, you see, coming from Catholic or Christian background, both me and Michael here, you have to understand that the Abrahamic faith um, consists of both the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But if you were to ask Abraham, what is your religion, he wouldn't say any of this. He would just say, "My religion is that I submit to the one and Almighty God." Yeah. So, I mean, what we're trying to say here is, why is it so important that we have this discussion, this comparative discussion? Mainly is to understand, how we are similar and how we are different, and but how we can actually unify together as one in common understanding. Where is the commonalities between these three faiths, and come to peace and understand, we have actually some similarities that we can work together with, and from there, probably build a better world, the world of more peace together. And that's why this is being discussed. It's not to bash Christians or to say they're wrong or something. It's more like, through this, why we share this, what you hear from maybe your pastor, your priest, and you can ask these questions as well, see whether you get answers from them. They have the answers too, so you can make an informed decision. So this is basically, Michael sharing his experience and his story and how he come to discover these things. Yeah, we hope that this has been, clear in that sense, so you don't misunderstand, why we have all this discussion. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, Michael.
That's
Back.
fine. I'm having
Yeah.
a little bit of a health issues these days,
Oh,
but I'm okay. It could be worse.
inshallah, we'll give you an outdoor ask.
So the next point would be which Barabbas was crucified. I'm not sure if anybody, all four Gospels mention the story of Barabbas. Barabbas basically, again, as I said, found in all four Gospels. Barabbas is supposedly the one who helped Jesus carry the cross in the New Testament. Jesus gets to a certain point. He can't, sorry, no, my bad. That's Simeon. My bad. Barabbas. Okay, sorry. The Jews completely messed up that story. There's a different story I just told you. That was the story of Simeon. My bad. Barabbas.
Okay.
Wow. So embarrassing.
Okay.
So the story of Barabbas actually is when the Jews are taking Jesus to the praetorium to be judged. So there was, they were trying to have, let me back up. The historical period at that point in Rome, in Jerusalem, who was under the control of the Roman Empire at that point. The Jews were not, because the Jews had been conquered by the Romans, the Jews were not legally, by Roman law, allowed to they weren't allowed to kill anybody, not crucify, but the Jews were not allowed to kill anybody. They could not actually, condemn anybody to death. If you wanted somebody killed, you'd have to take it with the Praetorium. Praetorium was basically like a Roman senator who represented Rome, but also took care of things in the province of the senator. So the one at the time was Pontius Pilate. So the story here goes that again, found in all four Gospels, in the Passion narratives, the story goes that, the Jews, of course, they condemned him to death when, the high priest tore his cloak and tore his garment. And, what further witnesses the Jews were judging him. All the Jewish leaders were there. The high priest was there, and they're asking him who he is, and it goes into a lot more detail, and Jesus basically gets condemned to death. And the high priest tears his garment, and what further witnesses do we need? What's the sentence for this man? And all the leaders that were part of the Jewish court system back then basically said he should be condemned to death. We should have him crucified. But they knew that they were not legally able to crucify people back then. Not just crucify. The Jews didn't crucify, but you know what I mean. They weren't able to kill people back then, unless it was permission from the Romans. So then that night, after Jesus was already condemned to death, in the presence of the Jewish leaders and their own little court systems, I guess you can call it. Then that night he's in the prison cell in the very, very small basement. And then next morning early, the Jews take him out to Pontius Pilate to be judged, and they're there, and Pontius Pilate, which was the Roman governor of that province, he says, well, what charges do you bring against this man? And the Jews are saying this thing. He said he would destroy the temple, rebuild it in 3 days, and other things, and he made himself equal with God. And then Pontius Pilate really wasn't convinced by that. So then, because the Jews were being very deceitful, and the Jewish leaders back then, in that time, didn't like Jesus that much. They basically said that he had committed treason, because there's a verse in the New Testament where so somebody asked Jesus about, you had to pay taxes back then to Rome to survive, and somebody had asked Jesus, about something to do with Rome, and Jesus' response was like he basically was setting up his own kingdom. So Jesus spoke a lot about the kingdom of God, this, and the kingdom of God, that, my kingdom. And so basically the Jews, they come to Pontius Pilate now, and they're telling him, this man claims to be a king because he says that he speaks about the kingdom and my kingdom. So that, of course, is treason in the eyes of the Jews. And in the eyes of the Romans, because for them there is no king but Caesar. So therefore now we have this trial that comes up with Pontius Pilate. And it was around the Sabbath day, a great Sabbath, one of the ones, a very special Sabbath in their sight, around Passover time. And you have Jesus here now, up and being tried with Pontius Pilate. But there was a tradition that went on in those days. It was it wasn't a Jewish, it had nothing to do with Jewish law or Roman law. It's just something that kind of happened. It's kind of like a cultural kind of thing that built after time. But they basically on this day before Passover, they would basically, on this Passover every year, they would let the Jews choose which prisoner could be released. They could choose one. So Pontius Pilate, there's two men there, Barabbas and Jesus. Barabbas is standing over on this side, Jesus is on this side. And Pontius Pilate, of course, knows, it says in the Bible, that the Jews were only trying to, set up Jesus because they were jealous of him and hated him. But so we have Barabbas and we have Jesus. And then there's this whole judging that goes on. Pontius asked the Jews, which prisoner would you want me to release to you? And they're all, the Jews convinced the crowd to call out for Barabbas, because they hated Jesus. So sorry for going into all that, but it's a little bit of a backstory that goes into it, just to give a little bit more context. So then, one thing that a lot of people don't really know is, Barabbas, the name Barabbas means Barabba in Hebrew, which is father, sorry. It means son of the father. Bar is son of, Abba, of the father. So that would literally be the translation of Barabbas's name. Barabbas's name would be son of the father. Now, also, the reason the Jews condemned Jesus to death is because he said, what? If you go read any of the New Testament depictions of Jesus being tried by the Jews, he's being charged with blasphemy.
Yeah.
No, treason by the Romans, but it was blasphemy by the Jews, because he said what? He said, because I am the son of the Father. I am the son of the Father. Therefore, the high priest tears his garment. What are the furthest witnesses do we need? This is blasphemy. So, for the Jews, it was all about this blasphemous kind of saying that Jesus was the son of the Father. So we have here Barabbas, the son of the Father, and we have Jesus, who's on trial according to the Jews, because he claims to be the son of the Father. That's why they did it. The Jews, as I said, the Romans, it was all treason. That's the excuse the Jews gave them. But for the Jews, they had already tried Jesus, and if you look at it, it says because he claimed to be equal with the Father, therefore making himself the son of the Father. So we have two Barabbases here, and then on top of it all, most people don't really, I don't know if most people know this, but Barabbas, the one that, was the murderer, that's what his charge was, Barabbas. His actual name was Yeshua.
Oh,
Yeshua,
I didn't know that.
didn't know this? Yeah, you can go look at it.
Yeshua.
It's not in the Bible, but I'm not kidding, not in the Bible, but it's in early church father traditions. Like, right after the apostles are dead and the disciples are dead, and then you have these early church fathers that go on till about the last ecumenical council around 740, excuse me, around 747, 757 AD. So a lot of these church fathers, they even said that his name was Yeshua Barabba, the murderer guy. So therefore, we have two Jesus, son of the Father, standing here. We have, Yeshua Barabba, the murderer, who, he was one of the zealot Jews who want to basically, destroy the Romans in the region, take over the land. They called them zealots. They actually believed there would be like a real, king that would come, and the Messiah would come and, basically slaughter the Jew, not slaughter the Romans. That was kind of the little group of Jews that Barabbas actually was a part of, Yeshua Barabba. So he was being condemned for death. And then you have Yeshua, Jesus, the other Jesus, Barabba, the son of the Father, the one being condemned by the Jews. So my whole point is with this, I feel like I'm kind of going on with this, getting to the point. My whole point with this is, well, which one was it? I mean, all we know is the crowd yelled out, Yeshua. But there's, two Yeshuas. You have Yeshua, the convicted, Yeshua,
Yeshua, the prisoner who is a murderer, the Barabbas that they.
And then we have Jesus, the one that the Jews claimed to be the divine Son of God, and it was blasphemous. So when they're calling out, let him be crucified, he's not our Messiah, he's not our King, and they said Yeshua. Well, which one was it?
Oops.
I mean, we really don't know. It's not clear. All we know is that then the prisoner was given, in the biblical manuscripts, that then the prisoner was given over to the to the Romans to be crucified and sentenced to death. So
Mhm.
again, I'm not saying this is a 100% depiction of perfect. It's not a 100% perfect idea of what happened. Maybe this was like I said, Jesus in the agony in the garden could be one of those parts where Jesus was saved, according to what we believe. Now, this Yeshua, Barabbas, this Jesus, son of the Father, both of them. Again, it could be another example of a spot where what we believe as Muslims, that Jesus was saved and raised up and ascended to God, to Allah, and is in the highest company with Allah, and is alive and was spared, and they neither killed him nor crucified him. So this is another spot, like I said, where I think maybe this is another spot where we could say, seems like it's kind of a place where now at that point we find, remember what it says in Surah Nisa, talks about, it was made to, the crucifixion was made to appear that way. So at this point, maybe it was, the murderer Barabbas, right? Barabbas, Yeshua Barabbas. Maybe that was the one who now at this point, Allah took Jesus, ascended him to himself, raised him to himself. And now maybe at this point we have Yeshua Barabbas, the murderer, the convicted murderer, now taking the image of Jesus, and of course going to be crucified. So that's another possibility. At least I think there is.
Okay.
So that's
So
New
yeah.
Testament.
Okay. Yeah. This is all in the New Testament, right? What you're referring to?
Yep.
Yeah.
All
So
four.
yeah, so in to simplify it, I think it's just that yes, there's a prisoner called Yeshua Baraba who is a murderer, and basically the Jews wanted to persecute Jesus. They needed a reason. They needed to get the Romans to find a good reason to crucify him, and the Romans do not take the fact that, oh, you call him son of God or anything. They wouldn't take this as a reason to crucify someone. But if you were to go against Caesar, basically that would be committing treason. That would mean that you can be crucified. And so the Jews gave that reason that Jesus was setting up his kingdom here on earth, and he's going to basically go against Caesar. So that is a good reason to put him on the cross. That was the reason that the Jews at that time gave the Romans. But the Jews themselves do not think that way. They were actually wanting to crucify Jesus because he gave them like a parable, something that they thought to think that he's the Son of God, and it was blasphemous in their eyes to say that, and therefore they wanted him to be dead as well. So it happens on the one of the holy Sabbath day for the Jews, and the Romans were at the, I mean, we can call it the court hall, the place where they put people on trial, and say, all right, you can choose either Barabbas, Yeshua Barabbas, which in the sense, the explanation is Jesus, son of God, Jesus, son of the Father, actually, Jesus, son of the Father, and or you want Jesus, son of the Father, who you want to be put on the cross. They gave the Jews a choice. And Michael is drawing this possibility that at this point in time, God might have actually saved Jesus, the real Jesus, and Yeshua Baraba could have taken the face of Jesus to be put on the cross. At this is his understanding of what happened. Yeah. Did I get it right again? Yeah, hopefully.
You're good.
Thank you. Next.
The last point. Now
Yeah.
this is it. This is the end. Excuse me. Point number 7. I'm going to focus on conjectures. When the Quran, Allah says those who, again, Surah Nisa 157, those who differ therein are full of doubts, no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. For surely they killed him not, nor crucified him. So Allah is saying here in Surah Nisa 157, the Christians they're not even certain about what happened or how it happened, or nothing but doubts and conjecture and assumptions. So when again, this is me in my own self-study of the crucifixion, just me at that time. I wanted to look at the actual gospel accounts of the Bible and the crucifixion scenes and resurrection, and see, were these early apostles, or were these early disciples, or the women that were following along Jesus as he's going up the Mount of Calvary or Golgotha, and were they sure it was him? And were all their detailed facts about everything that went on, were they the same? Were they all in unison, or was it nothing but division, conjecture, uncertainty, and assumption, as the law reveals? And what I found, when I really kind of went through it, and I'm gonna, this is my last point again. When conjecture, just keep that in mind. Conjecture. In the Gospel of John, chapter 19, did Jesus only carry the cross? Did Jesus only carry the cross, as in John chapter 19, or did Simon the Cyrenian carry the cross, as in all the other synoptic Gospels? Nothing but conjecture. In this first example, we have John saying Jesus carried his cross alone. In the synoptic Gospels, we have Simon the Cyrenian helping Jesus carry his cross. Doesn't seem like they're certain about that. Nothing but conjecture, uncertainty. The next point would be the two thieves crucified with Jesus. The two thieves mock Jesus on the cross, and there's one to the right, one to the left, and they're both being condemned to death for thievery in Mark chapter 15. And in Mark chapter 15, both the thieves mock Jesus. But in Luke chapter 23, in his depiction of the same event, he says one of them mocked Jesus. Again, uncertainty, conjecture. At what time was Jesus crucified? What time was Jesus crucified? In the Gospel of Mark, he says the third hour. In the Gospel of John, the sixth hour. Again, what time was Jesus crucified? They're not even sure. It's uncertainty. Mark, third hour. John, sixth hour. Totally different time periods of the day, according to the Latin form of following time. So again, uncertainty and conjecture. What happened after Jesus was crucified? Well, was the temple veil torn from top to bottom? Or did the earth shake? Rocks crumble? Saints rose from the grave? As in Matthew's gospel? Or did the sun, the little sun, not sun, sun, or did the sun darken, as in Luke's gospel? Or, as John's gospel says, nothing happened? Again, we have three gospels giving totally different things that happened at the scene of the crucifixion. One says, the temple was torn in half, the temple veil's torn. Rocks falling down, there's an earthquake, temple's torn. Luke's gospel has the sun being darkened. It was a sunny, beautiful day that day, and then it became dark. And John doesn't mention anything about anything happening. So again, uncertainty and conjecture, as the law says to us. Where was Jesus at the sixth hour? Where was Jesus at the sixth hour? On the day of the crucifixion. In John chapter 19, Jesus is on the cross at the sixth hour. Mark chapter 15, he's on the cross. In John chapter 19, he's in the temple in Pilate's court. So again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. Did Jesus die before the curtain of the temple was torn? Before the curtain was torn, again, as I said, the Jews had in their temple, there was a temple veil that separated the people from the Holy of Holies. And according to the Gospels, well, depending on which Gospel you read, uh, this temple veil was torn in half. So, did Jesus die before the curtain of the temple was torn? In Luke chapter 23, Luke says no, it wasn't torn. Matthew chapter 27 and Mark chapter 37, yes, he was crucified before the veil of the temple was torn. Again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. Did Jesus ascend to paradise the same day of his crucifixion? Did Jesus ascend to paradise on the same day as his crucifixion? Again, depends on which gospel you read. Luke chapter 23, he says yes, he did. John chapter 20, he says no. Again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. Was Jesus' body wrapped in spices before the burial in accordance with the Jewish burial customs of the time? Mark 16, Mark says no. John chapter 19, John says yes. Again, nothing but conjecture and uncertainty. At what time of day did what time of the day did the women visit the tomb of Jesus? Matthew 28 says it was towards dawn. Mark 16, when the sun had risen. Again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. When did the women buy the spices to anoint the body of Jesus? Mark 16 says after the Sabbath. Luke 23, before the Sabbath. Again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. Why did the women go to the tomb? Why did the women go to the tomb? In Mark 16 and Luke chapter 23, they say to anoint the body of Jesus with spices. In Matthew chapter 28, to see the tomb. Again, nothing but conjecture and nothing but uncertainty. Where was the large stone at the entrance of the tomb? There was a big stone at the beginning, but where was it? Where was the large stone at the entrance of the tomb? Mark 16, when the apostles, when Peter and John, Mary Magdalene, it's rolled back in Mark 16. Matthew 28, the women saw that the angel they saw the angel roll the stone back. So in Mark 16, when the apostles arrive in Mary Magdalene, it's already rolled back when they arrive. When excuse me. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. When Matthew 28, when the women saw the angel, when the women arrived in Matthew 28 and the apostles, they saw the angel roll the stone back. Again, nothing but conjecture, nothing but uncertainty. For the sake of time, there's a lot more conjecture and uncertainties, but I mean, I could have went double this time with that, but I just wanted to keep it kind of brief. But this definitely speaks of the truth of Allah's statement. It's what in Isaiah 157 about they don't even know what happened. And imagine, God, their God, right, who inspires the writers to write these verses, and every gospel has something different about details, about the same things happening, but totally different ways from the same God, and they call this inspiration. Unlike our Quran, where it's perfectly preserved and it's perfectly there's no errors or contradictions in our Quran. There's no conjecture, there's no doubts. But I felt like when I was thinking about this to myself, and as I said, I could double these conjectures. I was writing them down, when I was going through them again, and just to have them on a piece of paper. I could have had double this, but I just didn't want to keep on going and going and going, because I'm trying to be brief. I'm trying to control my time limit. So I yeah, I have to be careful of the time.
Yeah.
So this is, as I said, this is important because, like I said, the conjectures, Allah makes it clear. They're nothing but doubts, nothing but conjectures. It's all assumption. And these verses of conjecture definitely prove that. They couldn't even agree on what happened. Nothing. They couldn't even agree on what actually happened to Jesus.
Yeah.
That's
So
conjecture. That's assumption.
yeah. So if I mean like how the way I see it is like, if you were to put Matthew, the real person, let's say a real person, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in court, and they were to give the accounts of what happened that day, they would disagree with each other in many ways. Like they would say, no, was it Simon who helped him, or was it Jesus who carried the cross on his own all the way up the hill of Calvary to Golgotha, or did the temple's curtain did split into half? Was it before or after he was crucified? We're not sure. Was he? So if they were true eyewitnesses who saw the event, they would all say the same thing, but they don't say the same thing. So basically, Michael is drawing all these um, differences between the gospels, which don't add up, and therefore the crucifixion itself is uncertain at all. So that is why it's why he said that it's in the Quran in Surah Nisa, where it says that they do not know, it was just purely conjecture. All right. So okay, maybe I have a question for you from this. Like people say like history, the historians, they saw like the Shroud of Turin, where the Shroud of Turin is basically what was wiped over the face of Jesus the time where he fell. I think he fell. They call it the Station of the Cross in Catholic faith. He fell, and the girl came to wipe his face, and that Shroud of Turin has the face of Jesus, and it's so it kind of affirms that he was carrying the cross, right? That was what they say, and they have the nails of the crucifixion and so on and so forth. This why what is your take on that? Can how I mean, if there was conjecture, how is it that they have these things and they say it's Jesus' stuff?
Well, first off, just because they have a the crown of thorns, and they have some nails, and they have Jewish burial clothing. That doesn't mean anything. The Romans, first off, they crucified, I mean, I forget the exact number these days, but I'm just going to put it around hundreds of thousands of people in that area from the beginning of their reign to the end. It could even be higher, because I forget the exact. It's been a while since I've really looked that up. The number of, again, that would be hard to still figure out the exact number of crucified people. But I'm pretty sure the way how brutal the Romans were, I'm sure they had a field day crucifying Jews back then. And every Jew had to be buried the same way. They'd have to have the traditional burial cloths, the burial face garb, and of course, like any other crucifixion, um, anybody who would be a victim of crucifixion, obviously you're gonna have nails. Sometimes they would flog you. Sometimes they would put crown. Sometimes they would do both. Sometimes they would do none of those, and they would just crucify you. I guess it all depended on what you're being charged with and things like this. So, and then of course, when it comes to the Shroud of Turin, first off, in the Bible, for example, New Testament doesn't mention anything, of course, besides what you said, but that doesn't exactly. Yes, okay. Do they believe that the Veronica, the woman with the veil, wiped the face of Jesus? Sure, that's there, but we have no idea in all four gospels. We have no idea. Paul doesn't mention this in his epistles. None of the apostles in their books of epistles, their letters, mention this. The early Christian history from Acts, the apostles, which is also in the Bible right after the four gospels, doesn't even mention anything about them transitioning anything with this. And the first where you kind of come up to this is it's like a church tradition, like one day they just happened to. There was a church father that basically was talking about Veronica's veil, and he kind of started this whole, I'm going to call it a legend tradition of, and it doesn't mean it's right, but basically what he did was he says that, he did say that it was passed down from Veronica, and she gave it to to an apostle. He doesn't say which apostle, but to one of the apostles, and then, as the apostle died, he gave it to somebody, and then that one gave it to somebody, all the way down until now. But again, you know, just because they have a shroud or they have a Jewish burial clause doesn't mean it's actually crucified, risen Jesus burial cloth.
Okay. So there's no way of basically verifying if it's truly Jesus as well. Even if they have it, you can just take a cloth and say it was passed down from someone, and this is the face of Jesus. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if I remember
So
correctly, the shrouded Turin definitely had it had, like, blood. I think it was AB positive blood. I forget, it was either AB positive or negative. But again, there are people, and most of the Jews have that kind of blood type. By the way, I think it's even an Arabic blood type too. I might be wrong. It's either AB positive or negative, but it's one of them. So the fact that, you had some Jewish person's blood that was AB positive, which was the main blood of the Jews at that time, doesn't prove anything. As I said, the Romans were brutal and they knew how to crucify.
yeah. All right. So I think we've come to the end of tonight's episode. I hope you have benefited a lot from the sharing. So just one more time to reiterate, why we do this is not to, to offend anyone. Basically, both Michael and I were previously Christians, right? So this kind of matters to us because we have a past faith that, we believe strongly in, and eventually stepped out of it to come to embrace Islam. For reverts, maybe reverts will understand this better more than maybe probably even a born Muslim, because imagine you were in a faith for so long, and now you start to really do your research on it and find out more about it, and you found these are the things that you can't resonate with you, and so you like to share this because um it's never going to be resolved in us. And that's why we are here, embracing Islam. And main thing is to understand that we are all Abrahamic faith, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. All three of us belong to the father of Abraham, and we are drawing the similarities and differences here so that we can respect each other, live harmoniously, and understand where are the differences between us, and how we can come to terms with them, how we can accept our differences and live in a more harmonious and peaceful manner. Yeah, so tonight's sharing has definitely opened up a lot of my eyes as well. Certain things I did not know, like to know about Barabbas was also called Yeshua Barabbas. This is the first time I came across this. In fact, now it's like an eye opener for me. So it's quite refreshing to hear these stories again. I myself watched the entire Passion of the Christ at the time, when Mel Gibson had the movie Passion of the Christ. I watched the whole thing. So I mean, if you ask me to watch it again, I wouldn't, because it's quite gross. If you were to really watch it, I think you have to be above 18 to watch it, based on
It was
censorship.
very accurate. Very,
Yeah,
very
I love
accurate. If he was crucified, that's how they would have did it, trust me.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so if you guys want to know what's the next topic that's going to be up, Michael is going to share prophecies in the Bible of Muhammad, peace be upon him. So Muhammad was being prophesied in the Bible, and there are many verses that he can share with you in the next episode. Inshallah, we'll get to see him again. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and for everyone in America as well. Yeah, good day to you, and have a Juma Mubarak. It's a Friday and Blessed Friday, and I would like to wish all of you, including Brother Michael here, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.